I'm John Sumser, and this is the HR Examiner. Today, we're going to be talking with George Larocque. George is one of the most well-rounded senior executives in the HRTech, WorkTech space. He's done it all. He was a staffing firm. He was in the founding team at Brass Ring. He's been a go-to-market consultant. These days, he is plying his trade as the industry's expert on the deal flow inside of the industry. You're going to enjoy this one. George really has his finger on the pulse. Well, George, we've been talking a little bit about this business that you've built over the last few years. You sit at the intersection of all of the deal flow in HR tech. That's got to be an amazing parade to watch. How did you end up doing that?
It's only taken me a few decades to figure it out.
Well,
Well, I guess the simple answer is I've been sitting there watching, with my head on a swivel, watching the deal flow for a long time. And then as the pace of innovation continues to just, the cost of entry, there are almost no barriers to companies entering the space anymore, technically or cost wise. So many new things coming into the market. And I started to look at some of the traditional sources of data where you would normally go to find this, whether it was media or like a CB Insights or a PitchBook or whoever. And as I was following it, I was realizing I'm seeing a lot more than they're telling me is happening. And so about 10 years ago, I started tracking it, put some tools in place and validated, yeah, I'm seeing by factors. Like even today, a decade later, if Crunchbase tells you $1 billion came into HR tech, I probably see 2 or 3 billion.
wow.
And it's not just having the data, but it's knowing what to do with it or knowing what to tell the tools as to how to interpret something, but then it does take some vetting to get there. So it's always been important to me because it's the front door to innovation. It's competitive landscape. People, vendors coming into the market today are leading the market in 5 years. So yeah, so it was by necessity and by curiosity that I finally got there.
So one of the things I hear you say fairly frequently is that you can go to the sort of usual suspects and get an answer to the question of market sizing. And when you go ask the same question with your methods, you get an answer that's 2, 3, 4, 5x the size of what the other thing. Why?
Well, market sizing and capital flow, two different things. But I think on the capital flow, like I said, it's about, well, fundamentally, I think it's understanding what fits where. That's the common thread between both. On the market sizing bit, I think it's having an understanding of. So if I said payroll, a very well educated analyst not from this space, payroll is a paycheck. Well, I think payroll also includes a PEO and an EOR, and it includes, payroll, foundational payroll tech. It's contingent workforce, any place it's workforce management where there's pay included. That's that's off their radar. So a lot of these things are paid for in ways or budgeted in ways that might not align with like a traditional, ADP or Paychex sort of, straight run payroll process. So I think that's just an example of how
Right.
things have changed. Also, how on the market sizing piece, now this is this is changing as we speak, but 15 years ago when I started on the market sizing front, I realized everybody's still sizing this market based on a license purchase for like an on-premise piece of software, but everybody's buying this stuff on subscription models in what was emerging as the standard sort of price per employee per month model, which has a graduating scale across market segments and regions and categories. And so just vetting that information gave me a completely different view of the size of the market. And then you get into availability and obtainable market, and that's a whole different conversation. But I think understanding what it is, how it fits, what should be in that conversation, and then how people actually buy it or pay for it is something that was fairly unique, has been fairly unique. Now, right now, part of the conversation you and I were just having, are we headed, is it usage based, consumption based? Where is this all headed? Nothing has substantially changed yet when it comes to the applications in our space and how the end use buyers are paying for them. But there's a lot of movement in a lot of discussion around those changes.
It's a moment like I've seen a million of these things now. It's a moment like Kodak having the patents for all of the digital photography technology at the time, but not being able to see past their film processing business. And they right.
That's a great analogy. Can't give that up. You can't give away the film processing business. I mean, that's
when you could actually tell pretty early on that this would all be a single device sitting in your hand and it would be digital. Just it went through some very clunky moves, but that question of how do you get to see something better than automating the mistakes that we've already made and come up with the positive thing, which is unleashing capacity because we're rethinking the whole process. I don't think we've hit anything like that yet. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think there are, maybe small examples of somebody, trying to rethink something. What I see a lot of are, founders overcomplicating. They're reimagining the connection between, the workforce and jobs, and in order to deliver on this vision, it's, to replace the resume and replace the job description, they're creating something way more complicated,
Right.
which, I never works. But I see a lot of that, so I think we're in a very, I don't know if everybody's mind is yet open. I'm not saying mine is, or I have the answers, but to what actually could be possible. But I'm pretty sure it's based on, I think in the future, the immediate future, whoever has the data wins, because that's really what everything that we're trying to reimagine is based on, whether it's the employee data, the pay data, the candidate data. That's what's required in order to fuel every vision that I'm seeing in the market.
Well, it's interesting because part of what keeps us from going that next step is seeing the boundaries that are kind of artificial. Like if you look at recruiting, I'm tempted to say that recruiting has precious little accountability and no budget discipline. And so if you look at recruiting from the organization's perspective, where everybody but recruiting is under the pressure to account for every penny that they spend, every penny that they commit, and the long-term consequences of it. Recruiting routinely goes out and defies the budget. Routinely. It's wild. And the process is, well, I don't know a recruiter anywhere who gets bonused on the performance of the people they hire.
Yeah, I've not met one.
Yeah, no, they'd all be scared to, but that's really everybody else in the organization has that kind of accountability.
And I don't think it's all just to be fair to the recruiting organizations, I think part of that challenge is many times recruiting feels like an easy button to folks who are actually making the hires. Like, okay, go hire me these people, these types of people today, like or tomorrow. And it doesn't happen that way. And we end up in a fire drill situations. And, that's just ripe for throwing good money after bad again and again and again. Whereas to contrast that with marketing, where I'm really thinking about who's my customer, who's my buyer, what's going to work, how do I get in front of them, what's most cost effective, that level of organizational, planning and strategic thought, I think in spots happens in recruiting. It's in most environments, it's throwing good money after bad when the challenge is getting more candidates.
Yeah, I don't mean to suggest that there's something wrong with recruiting as a discipline. It's like a lot of things. If you're firing somebody, it's almost always the boss's problem, not the employee's problem, or the system's problem, not the employee's problem. But we like scapegoating. It's way easier if it's your problem and not mine. The systems are set up just as you described, so that you have this anomalous mass that doesn't operate the way the rest of the organization operates. And I think if you start there and you go, how do you make systems deliver accountable results, you get some different answers, right? You might not think that there is as important a distinction between recruiting and compensation all of a sudden. You might see a tighter alignment with development than you have currently, because everything is so siloed and the silos are generally pretty rigid. You got to imagine that the next wave of stuff that's going to last is going to break down those silos. Like if you could go into the CFO's office and say, here's our budget for recruiting. The budget for recruiting is partly the compensation architecture of what we're willing to pay for something. And here's what happens if we go over, and here's what happens if we go under.
Yep.
Like like better engineered systems can do. I don't think that's that far away. Who's the buyer? That's part of what keeps us in silos is the buyer lives in a silo. And if you
Yeah.
go to a buyer in a silo and say, hey, we got a great big Swiss Army knife that solves all of the problems everybody has everywhere, why don't you buy it? They have to form a committee of people who are all almost by definition opposed to the idea to begin with. And
Right.
so so you don't get very far. Anyhow, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the seat that you have. I'm really jealous. It's such a smart idea. Who are your customers?
My customers are generally vendors that are interested in, depending on their stage, they're interested in either getting access to investors or getting an understanding of the market or the ecosystem they belong in, or getting an understanding of what their ecosystem should look like, an understanding of where they should be partnering, who they might be. It's the build by partner conversation for the later stage vendors. And the through line is understanding who's in the market, who's doing what. I also view in my list, my community, my following, a lot of HR leaders. And while I very rarely get paid by them, they consume a lot of content. They reach out and looking for the same understanding. Who's doing what's emerging, and what should we be keeping our eye on. But that's my world is more of an advisory world than, while I still put out reports based on this, more so than the traditional analyst approach.
It seems like you and I were talking about this a little bit. It seems like we're at an interesting economic inflection point.
To say the least. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. What a great time to be alive. It's so awesome to be alive right now. But that means that a lot of things that have been predictable over time are starting to not be so predictable. How are you talking to people about that?
That's a great question. I think it starts with understanding where they are. And what I mean a couple of things by that. I think there's understanding. So let's say they want to talk to me about recruiting technology. Okay, what type of business are you? If it's a vendor, who is your customer? Who's buying it? How is it used? Let me understand where you sit in the market. If they're buying it, let me understand who you're hiring, what your business looks like. But it also means where they are in. You and we've talked about this a couple of times. We've had a long, very long economic cycle of prosperity until now. The last couple of years that have been more uncertain, and seem to be increasingly uncertain. A lot of folks making decisions, running the vendors, buying the products, have never been through a cycle like this before. So understanding where they are in that, and sometimes I feel like on the advisory side with some founders, I'm more of a uh, life coach than I am advising them on their business to help them understand, look, this is the way the market is. This is, we're not in the days of 2020, 2021, where capital was cheap and valuations were crazy. Those days are gone, and we need some basic performance to validate the business before you can go achieve the kind of goals that you're looking to achieve. And that's so I think understanding where they are is where I start. And then it's different from if I'm talking to somebody that's concerned about an employee population that is, frontline workers, and, whether it's retail or manufacturing or healthcare. That's a very different conversation than someone who's thinking about, marketers and data scientists and, what we, call knowledge work. These are two different environments, and what's possible and what's required is very different in those environments. So, as a couple of examples.
Got it. Got it. So as you were talking, I was thinking you must get into conversations frequently about the value of a college education. And I know you've got young ones headed in that direction. What do you think the value of a college education is these days? Is it a waste of time, or is it? I tend to think the people who say it's a waste of time have bad motives underneath it.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's a waste of time. I think the real question starts to become, the cost of the education, the amount of debt attached to that education versus where you'll be when you're out in the working world or in the world. I think those are the things that we need to be thinking about. So I do, yeah. I talk to a couple of young adults right now quite frequently about the value of an education. And I think some of the it's a space where they're figuring out, they're literally before my eyes figuring out, not necessarily what they're ultimately going to be, but what that first stepping stone is going to be as they head down that path, and figuring out at the same time who they are, and holistically what that all means. And I think if there's nothing more valuable than getting that, if it's not if you're not saddled with excessive amounts of debt and then having to
Right.
go make bad decisions in order to not great decisions in order to satisfy paying for an education that may or may not be your marketing degree. You might not end up in marketing, other than disciplines that are very specific like engineering or medicine or so forth. I think that's the key to me.
So when you talk to your kids, how do you explain your career? We didn't do this. We didn't do this at the beginning, but you've had this delightful trajectory moving into spaces that are always adjacent to the last space.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you've developed a sort of a multifaceted view of the market because you sat in most of the chairs. How do you explain that? Because you sure as hell didn't plan to do that.
No, no, I'm glad you ended up there because I was going to say it looks like a plan, but it was anything but. I think it is the way I explain it is, consistently, obviously working hard, all the stuff you would tell you've got, come into it and, be a good person, but there's a huge value in doing that and working hard and in being true to your word and all of that. You end up developing good relationships and what we like to talk about as a network. That's something that you get to, I think that's another thing, one of the most valuable things you can develop as you get your education is a network. Every place that you go, you're sort of extending that network while you're extending your knowledge. And for me, it was just a series of decisions, just like anybody else. I'm in a situation, I'm ready for the next thing, or I need to get out of it, or I'm being put out of it. And I see the writing on the wall, and so what's the next right thing for me? and I fall back on my network and what I know. And I've had the good fortune of being in a discipline and a space where, being in recruiting when suddenly the internet became a thing and the web became a thing and then the cloud became a thing, and expanding the horizons into HR and the rest of the HR domain as we moved forward into more mature business models and now AI. I feel very fortunate that I've been there to see each of these transformations, and it's making those decisions each time that were just right for me. And at that time, that's how I explain it. And there's some luck in there for
So,
sure.
so I'm going to reach way back and go. You were in the Air Force
Mhm.
on the tarmac, um, doing technical shit. How much of that influences the way you see the technology today, and how much of that core technical discipline that you got there percolates through your work?
I think it's the technology so far removed. I think how it really impacts everything is organizationally, how, and when it comes to people. So at so many levels, right? So when you put that uniform on, you're all the same except for the stripes or the bars, right? And that gives me an understanding of who do I have to listen to, or who do I listen to? I know exactly what my skills are because I've got these codes that tell me, I've been studying this, and I'm qualified or not qualified to do certain things and lead on certain things. But then I'm also in an environment where I can trust that we've all got that. It doesn't always work out that way necessarily, but you could trust that everybody had those skills that were required, or they were given that, and that there was a chain of command where, the information was flowing freely. I think that it has been something really powerful. And maybe more than anything, the fact that, like I said, when you see people as not different, for me, as a kid coming out of New Hampshire, that was very powerful for me in a very positive way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you've seen all of these transitions over time. You've seen a lot of transitions over time. And we're in the middle of a heavily enthusiastic marketplace about AI. How do you see that transition unfolding?
The hype, doesn't reflect the realities on the ground as far as adoption. There's a lot of fear. I think we live in this bubble, right? We live in this AI bubble. So the minute it came out, I'm using it, learning from it, understanding what works, what doesn't. You have this incredible opportunity to be with folks developing massive systems, trying to get them at scale and understanding there what's working and what isn't. But most people in this world, literally the world, what they know about AI is what they see in a headline or in their social feeds. What I've been saying lately is AI is happening to them, not with them. And the
Uh-huh.
pace of this transformation, uh, when the internet emerged, and then it became the web, and we moved to the cloud, these were all big transformational shifts, and it impacted a lot of work, but it happened over 10 or 15-year cycles. That's traditionally how it used to happen. We're seeing this cycle happens so much faster, and decisions being made that are impacting people's jobs so much faster than we've seen it before. That's the part that concerns me, is there's a real education gap when it comes to AI, not just at the tactical level, but even the leadership level. The folks that are trying to get their head around where do we go with this, they need some time to get their head around what this is and what the possibilities are. And what the realities are. I look far down the road, and I think we're going to get there, and the market and the economy and labor and people will adjust the way they always do. But I feel like this one's looking more painful in the short to medium term than I've seen in the past. I hope I'm wrong about that. And I hope we get some thoughtful regulation and some companies that demonstrate some success based on some thoughtful leadership that others follow. But I'll be watching like the rest of us. I'd love it if I had an impact on that, but that's a lot of variables.
There's a lot of variables, and there's also this feels to me like the world has moved to the pay equity of the private equity model of management.
Yeah,
So
that's a
and
really good
so
point.
so so everything is about squeezing empathy out and dollars in.
Yeah,
We want to extract maximum profitability in the shortest amount of time possible. And I think that's actually more of what's happening than the AI hype, because the AI hype, I think AI hype is the best marketing scheme I've ever seen. Ready? You're going to lose your job tomorrow unless you learn about AI. $20 a month, please.
right, right.
What a great marketing scheme. Boo, the scary guy is going to get you. Give me money now.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Right, and so you have those 2 things operating, and I have this feeling that all of the money's gone. I know you're sitting where it looks like a river, and it runs by you, and you see all the deal flow, and you see it in explicit detail. But, all of these private equity companies are sitting on huge inventories of companies they can't sell because they ramped up the valuation while they cut out all of the capacity to grow and prosper along the same time, so it's junk. It's junk. It's sort of the proverbial junk bond. You can see the companies lying by the roadside, and that may be what clears the ground for AI. That financial engineering is what it is. It's financial engineering. It's figuring out how to make the market bark when you want it to bark, and you take that and a bunch of people who are scared, and you get to rapid but painful transition.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the way we see that right now in that investment in our space is, at this moment, are there's still a healthy. If you look at the top line numbers, it's still a healthy level of, uh, I'll say, growth capital coming into the space. Um, but it's fewer bets, bigger deals. So it looks like the deals over 100 million are, we'll probably set a record this year for how many of those, or definitely over 50 million. There's a glut of early stage companies trying to raise capital right now, that it's a combination of brand new startups with innovative ideas, all AI, period, not AI forward, but AI driven. But they're competing with the SaaS companies who bolted AI on, who waited to raise their next early stage, right from their pre-seed to their seed, while the market was bad. And it's just this glut of companies all going after that early stage capital. And while it looks, even at a seed stage, like, okay, this compares to last quarter and the quarter before that, it's super painful because there are more people not getting the funding that that they need, because there isn't more capital really flowing at that stage, but there are more companies in the mud wrestling ring trying to find. So that's the it's a, like, so much. When you look at the headlines, I could say, well, we're probably going to do 7 billion or more this year, based on, we're already over 6. It's December. So it looks like we're headed in that, direction. That sounds great until you go a level deeper, and a level deeper, and you realize a lot of it's going to later stages, and the smaller startups, earlier stage startups, are not having an easy go.
So that's really interesting. That sounds so parallel to what I see happening with the early AI initiatives, which is you take where I think people learn what you learned in the Air Force, the basic job, which involves doing horribly repetitive remedial crap, till you understand the terrain well enough to take on something bigger. And you automate that away, and you end up with no development path from the bottom to the first rung of the ladder, and people above the first rung of the ladder who are hyper valuable but don't have new people to learn from. So the big deal value, and to run it back into your deal flow, I'd be very interested in, you may not want to do this, and that's okay too, but I'd be very interested in your appraisal of what percent of those big deals that are sucking up all the capital are actually bringing value to the marketplace?
That's a great question. I don't know if I want to throw a percentage on the value question without spending a few minutes with it, but I would tell you that
Right,
it's really more about there are two types. There's the company with sound operating principles and results that are getting that next bigger round as they should, if that's the path they want to be on. And then the companies that where I don't get it at all. I don't see the value. And I'm not sure if it's 70-30, 50-50, 60-40, as things happen so fast. But there's a good healthy chunk of companies that are self-fulfilling prophecies that the we need it to be successful. We need to hype it up. We need to prop it up, and we need to put more money into it in order to, give it a chance. And I think there's plenty of that out there still.
Yep, yep. It's part of the nature of the investment world that we've inherited. I don't know that it'll last forever, but in the investment world we've inherited, nobody fails. You just pull the pieces together, you sell them up the chain to the next guy. That doesn't stifle innovation, but it does make, well, I don't know. When was the last time you saw a venture capital company championing its losses in a long presentation?
Right. Yeah. I think they're all pretty honest about the fact that, like the 10% success rate, or, some might, they're, having a 20% success rate sounds amazing. And yeah, it's an interesting thought that you bring up, because, we're also in this rapid time of consolidation and M&A activity. And that's going to, I think, get even more so. I think we've really just started that process this past year. We've been waiting for it to initiate. We finally had a couple of big deals that sort of opened some lanes up and so forth. But at the same time, there are acquisitions like those big deals where, the valuations and the dollars invested and so forth are, those are big deals. And it's a money-making event for investors, employees, everyone. A lot of these deals that are, there's nothing wrong with them, and it may be the best thing for the product and the team at the time, but they're not money-making events for anybody except the folks with preferred shares. And that doesn't get talked about. And that isn't really, many founders don't discover that is a thing until they find out that's the path that they've suddenly put themselves on,
Right,
whether that's by raising too much or not having the results to back it up, or both. And that's been an interesting, it's an interesting place to be. Talk to a lot of folks who want to raise more or exit, and they just aren't there. And by raising more or exiting, you need to have a certain amount of, your numbers need to be in a certain place. Your
right,
business needs to be in a certain place to substantiate it, unless you're happy to go, be viewed as a, acqui-hire or
right,
distressed asset, and, treat it accordingly.
right, right. Sounds like you could open a master class in how to manage your cap table.
Yeah, I think unfortunately they don't know, many people don't start thinking about that until it's too late, until
Right.
it probably needs to be cleaned up.
Yep, yep. So this has been awesome. Thanks for taking the time. Anything you want to say before we cut this off? And by the way, as part of anything you want to say, let people know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, well, oneworktech.com is the website. LinkedIn, I'm very active there. Happy to connect there as well. And John, I just always enjoy our conversations. You always get me thinking, and I always learn something. And I'm just happy to be here. And I'm glad to see HR Examiner back, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And thanks. It works both ways. We've been at this a long time, George.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and see you next time around.